In today's tutorial, I'll share how you can paint this landscape in Procreate on the iPad. I'll be going over each and every step, and it may not be as difficult as you think. So let's get into it. Alright, so before we begin, I am using a canvas size of about 4,000 pixels by 2,700 pixels. The color profile is the display P3. And for the brushes, I'll mainly be using the round brush and the flat brush from the painting section, along with the soft brush from the airbrushing section. So with that said, let's get into the painting. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to pull out the color palette here just so I have it accessible on the side. And I'm going to choose a light, somewhat desaturated lighter blue. And I want to go to the airbrushing section of brushes and choose the soft brush. And I'm going to paint in the whole canvas with this lighter blue color. And then I'll choose a slightly closer to white color and paint in the bottom half of the canvas here. Really the bottom, I'd say the bottom 3/4 of the canvas, and then we'll have a slight gradient in about this top fourth of the canvas up here, maybe the top kind of third of the canvas here. We'll have a gradient into the blues. And in the very top left corner, I'll get some more of a greenish cyan color and just paint in very softly at the top left, just to introduce some more color. I don't want to go overboard with it, but I do want a little bit more color variety in here. And so this will be our sky layer. So we're on layer 1. This is going to be the sky layer here. And I may hit the right side, top right, with a little bit of this whiter blue. So I'm going to sample this color down here and just softly paint this in at the top right. So I know that I want the sun to be on this side of the canvas over here. And so the sky is naturally going to be closer to a white color over here, and it's going to be a more saturated blue further away from the sun on the left side of the sky. So with the sky layer in, now we can tap the plus icon for a new layer, and now we have layer 2. So I'm going to start to get in a rectangle shape for the water of this scene. So I use the selection tool here, this S-shaped icon, make sure it's set to rectangle mode. And I will draw in a rectangle selection here to about a little bit under halfway. So I'd say halfway would be maybe about here. So maybe slightly below that. Somewhere about here should be fine. And we'll just paint this in with a blue color. This is kind of a placeholder because we're going to want reflections on this water later on in the painting. So I don't need to worry too much about the color right now. We can always change it later. So the next step, we'll go to layer 1 and we'll add a new layer above layer 1. So now we have layer 3, and I'll go to the painting section and select the round brush. And we want to get in some mountains in the very far background. Now you can either do this by painting this in by hand, by using the round brush, something like this, and just kind of paint these mountain shapes in. Or you can use the selection tool, which is what I'm going to do. I'll use the selection tool and set it to freehand mode. And I'm going to start on the left side here, and I'm just going to draw in these mountain shapes. And I want this to be more of a sharper, more imposing, kind of like a rocky mountain. And I want it to peak kind of in the middle. I have this triangular shape where the tallest point is going to be towards the middle of the canvas. Just complete this selection here. And I'm using the selection tool just because I can get cleaner edges and more detailed edges with one selection rather than having to go in with a round brush and do all of that by hand. So I'll paint this selection in with a light blue, maybe something like this, and just paint it all in. I'll just use the flat brush to broadly just paint this in, and maybe we'll go a little darker than that. Something like that should be fine. So what I'll do here is I like the selection, but I think it could be refined a little bit. So I'll use the erase tool, and it's set to the round brush. So I can erase some of this selection out and subtract from the shape that we just made until I get a shape that I think looks slightly more refined and overall just better than the selection that I made. And you might not need to do this if your selection is how you want it to be, but I think that mine could use a little work, so I'll just erase some of the edges out to get it exactly how I want it. And then I can also just sample this color here and go to the round brush, and I can draw in some of these shapes as well. So I'm subtracting but also adding to the shape. So by erasing, I'm subtracting from this silhouette, kind of carving into it, and by using the brush and painting in more edges, I'm adding to the silhouette. And by using these two techniques, we can get a nice shape that really captures the mountain vibe that we want. So you'll see me flip the canvas here, and I may do this often throughout the painting just to see how things are looking and how if things are balanced or if things need to be fixed a little bit. A lot of times a horizontal flip can really help you see the painting in a new light. It kind of is like holding it up to a mirror. So I think it's a good tip, maybe something to try out if you haven't. If you don't usually try that out, it's something that can really help you see things in a new perspective. And I'll just go to this arrow icon at the top left, and I will set it to warp, which is at the bottom right here. And I can kind of just warp some of the silhouette that I've made already just to fit more of what I have in mind. So again, just kind of manipulating the shape that we've made already. We're not worrying about any details or any color variety or anything like that. We're just working with the shape and trying to find a nice composition and kind of sculpt and mold this shape. All right, so once we have a shape that we like, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be getting in some more mountain layers here. So I'll go and add a new layer above layer 3, and I'm using the round brush here still, and I will sample this background mountain color that I painted earlier, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So I'll just drag this down slightly darker and maybe a little bit more saturated and maybe more into the blues. And I'm going to paint in this shape here for this mountain. Just a simple silhouette shape should do. Again, we can always edit this and refine this later. In the colors as well, we can change the values if we need to make them darker or brighter. And we may find that the more elements we get in the scene and the more values that we introduce, we may need to adjust the values a little bit to accommodate for, the added elements that we'll get in later. But for now, again, this is fine. We'll do another layer above layer 4, and we're gonna bring this color down a little bit even darker, maybe slightly even more saturated. Not too much, but enough to see a slight difference. Maybe a little lighter than that. Yeah, this should be fine. And I'm just gonna paint in another triangular shape here for another mountain. And these mountains are slowly getting closer and closer to the viewer. So they're gonna be getting darker because there's less atmosphere. So the mountains in the very background are going to be much more blue because there's a lot of atmospheric perspective, which is basically just atmospheric particles between the viewer's eye and the mountain itself. So the further things back are, the more blue they're going to look, and the more washed out and lighter they will also look. So these background mountains are quite light and quite blue, but I may make them a little darker here. We'll see how things go. I'll make a new layer above layer 5 for now, and I'm going to shift this down even darker than what we just had previously. And I'll paint in another triangular shape here for some more mountains. Again, I'm just using the round brush. You can use the selection tool if you want to get some clean, hard edges in there, but I think this should work fine for now. I'll do one more layer above here for layer 7 for some more mountains, and I'll again make this color slightly darker and paint in some more shapes, maybe a little bit darker than that. Just paint in some more mountain shapes here. We really want this to feel layered and like it has depth to it. So getting all these mountains in here will help. All right, and we'll do one more layer above layer 2. This one is going to be mountains that are the closest to us, so they're going to be the darkest, and they're going to be the most true to their natural color because there's the least amount of atmosphere in between us and these mountains since they are so close to us. So we're going to start, I'm just going to use the selection tool here, and I'm going to start on this right side of the canvas and just have this kind of steep mountain shape come down and eventually go to that kind of horizon where the water ends right there. And I want to just make this triangular shape and bring it back out, and then complete the selection, tap on the gray circle, and we can paint this in with an even darker blue, maybe a little bit less saturated this time. And we'll just paint this shape in. And we can refine some of the edges if you think it's like right here, maybe a little messy. Just make sure that that shape looks pretty good, and then we can do the same thing on the other side. This time I'm going to have it be less steep. We'll start on the left side right here with the selection tool. And I'll just start to draw in this triangular shape once again, bring it to about the horizon there, and I'm gonna just bring it back outside the canvas, and then tap on the gray circle to complete the selection. Then we can paint this in with a round brush. All right, from here, again, we can just edit and adjust these shapes. I'm just gonna erase some of them here to clean them up, and then we can add to them using the brush, like I was talking about adding and subtracting to this mountain shape that we were playing with earlier. We do the same thing with these. So I'll go to layer 7, this mountain that we painted earlier, and I'm noticing that it's kind of getting obscured by this new mountain layer that we put above it. So I'm just going to move it. I'm going to use the move tool, and actually I'll use the selection tool and just circle this portion, because we did 2 of them, right? So there's one here and there's one on this side. So I'm just going to circle this one on the right side and then tap on the move tool, which is this arrow icon, and then we can just move it over, make sure it's set to uniform. We can just move it over slightly to shift where it is. And I'll do the same thing for layer 6, which is this one here. Tap on layer 6, tap on the move tool. I'll just move it over a little bit. One of the nice things with digital painting is all these things are very adjustable, so we're not messing up any of the work that we previously made. We can really move these layers around and shift things and change things without worrying about messing anything up or ruining any work that we've previously done. So I like what we have here. I'll go to layer 3, and I want to add more to this mountain shape on the right side here. Now that I have these other mountains in here, I can kind of see how everything looks together, and I just want some more details on this right side here. So just using the round brush to add on to this shape. And again, we want it to feel natural. This is an organic mountain, so have some nice size variety and some shape variety here, as well as we want a rocky kind of sharp feel because of the way that these mountains are going to be. They're going to be covered in snow, but they are generally sharper, steeper, rockier mountains. So just keep that in mind when building up the shapes. All right, and I'll go to layer 4 here, which is this one. On the left side, I'm going to sample the color, and I'll just add more to this shape as well. So again, just refining what we have here. All right, so I'm feeling pretty confident with what we were able to get in here for these mountains. I think that we could take layer 3 and make it a little darker. It does feel a little light compared to the rest of the mountains that we've gotten in. So I'll just go up here to the adjustments, go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and turn down the brightness by I'll do about 1%. I think that should be all right. Maybe 2% here. I'll go to 48%. So just making it a little darker, and that's before and after. And I think that's better. All right, so the next step here, we have all the mountains looking pretty good. Now we want to go to layer 3, and I'll make a new layer above it, and I'll tap on the layer, tap on clipping mask, and now everything that we paint will be confined to this shape, so we can't break the silhouette here, and that will just keep things clean, so we don't have to worry about messing up the edges that we've already made. So what I'll do is sample the color of this mountain, and I'm going to make it slightly darker, maybe more saturated, maybe shifted more into the purples as well. And I will start to paint. I'm using the round brush here, so I'm going to start to just paint freely by hand, maybe a little lighter than that. I'm just going to paint in these shapes here for this mountain. And we're on a separate layer, so everything that we paint can be adjusted later on, which is, again, a nice thing about working with layers like this. So I'll just paint in these shapes here for these rocks. As I mentioned earlier, this is a snowy mountain. So these lighter portions are going to be the snow, the stuff that we painted earlier. And now I'm painting in these rocks that are kind of peeking through the snow, where the snow isn't covering. And so I'm doing this by hand, but I can also use a selection tool to make these kind of organic rock shaped selections and then paint it in using a round brush. Either way, it doesn't matter too much as long as we're just getting in these rock shapes. And then we can use the erase tool and erase some of what we painted out to get some smaller shapes as well. And when creating detail and when painting in detail, we should focus on the balance of shapes, right, and size of shapes. So for example, I have a big shape here. I'd say this is kind of a big shape. And then we have maybe a medium shape right here, and then these two small shapes here. Now, if everything was big, if all the shapes were big or if all the shapes were small, and if we have too many small shapes like this. Like, see, I'm starting to get a lot of just small shapes in here, and this starts to get noisy here, and you can see I think there's too many small shapes. So whenever we paint, let's try to just group things a little bit better. So maybe we can get a nice big shape right here. We can make some of these medium shapes like this, maybe this one here, and then we can have a few small shapes around it, and now it just feels more natural and more grouped and less noisy overall. And so that's something I always try to keep in mind when painting detail, because it can get out of hand pretty quickly, and we don't want to worry too much about smaller details. Grouping into bigger shapes is a good way to save time and to be more efficient and simplify detail, because a lot of times detailing can take a lot of time and energy just to paint in small details that may not even be noticed. So I really like mountains and painting mountains. I think it's a good practice for learning to paint landscapes and environments, because we don't have to, especially scenes like this, we're not worrying about perspective too much. It's a pretty flat perspective. You notice I didn't even get a perspective grid on this tutorial, and that was because I didn't really need to. And so scenes like this are really good for just kind of working with shapes and values and practicing how to get depth into a scene. And they're just fun to paint, in my opinion. And there's so many different subject matters as well, even just within mountains, right? There's so many different types of mountains and different environments that have this kind of mountain feel, you know, whether it be a desert mountain scene or snowy mountains, or there's just so many different environments that we can practice with. So it's a really fun thing for me. Just continuing to build up this detail here. This part is probably going to be the longest or the most tedious part of this painting, just slowly working in this detail. You could use a texture brush if you wanted. I find that painting in by hand and with the selection tool gives me more control, whereas a texture brush, sometimes it feels like I don't have as much control over those textures that I paint in. So I just like to use the round brush and selection tool just to keep it simple. But if you have some texture brushes, a lot of times they can sometimes save time, but I also feel like they get a little repetitive because some of the shapes are just repeating shapes, and sometimes I feel like they can just have this repetitive kind of feel to them. So we're also adding form into this mountain as well. So we started off with just these flat silhouette shapes, and now I'm getting in some more form. So how you paint your detail will really determine how your shapes feel in a three-dimensional space. So now I'm painting in kind of at the base of the mountain. These could either be trees or maybe just some more rocks. And I'm gonna leave the midsection of the mountain around this area somewhat scarce of detail. So it's gonna be mainly just kind of snow. But at the base here, we're gonna have more of this rock showing through, and maybe the trees coming up the base of the mountain. Doesn't matter too much as long as we just get that value in there. It's so far away that we wouldn't really notice or see the details. So as long as we just get a indication of value changing, then that should be fine. So as always, if you're painting along, feel free to tag me on Instagram if you end up finishing the painting. I'd love to see what you make. Again, I make these tutorials hoping that they're helpful and that you can learn something from them. So I'd love to see the results. So just tag me on Instagram or message me and I'll be sure to check it out. All right, so I'm gonna speed up the video here, and I'm just gonna be adding in some of this detail using the round brush and the selection tool, just building up all of these rocks here. All right, so with the detailing on the mountain looking all right for now, I will start to get in some lighting onto this mountain. So it's going to be more detail, but we're going to use a different value. So the sun is going to be coming, like I said earlier, from this side and illuminating the right portions of this mountain. It's just going to pick up on some of the edges of the mountain though, so we don't want it to illuminate like the full side like this. Just going to pick up on some of the rocks and snow. So we'll create a new layer above layer 9 and set it to clipping mask mode, and we will sample this light blue here, and we're just going to make it close to white, a light blue close to white, something like that. And I'm using the round brush again, and probably use a selection tool for this, and I'm just going to select in some shapes here, just a couple of these shapes, and we're going to paint this in with this color that we've chosen, and that will be some of the lighting hitting the mountain. And we're going to continue to do this on some of the edges of these rocks, like right here, maybe right here. And again, I'm just using the round brush, just painting this in by hand, just getting that lighting hitting some of the edges of this mountain here, and just the rocks picking up the lighting just here and there. I had some lighting here as well. It does give the impression that there is sunlight that's somewhere in the scene, and it also further helps create some form. Alright, so now that the lighting's pretty good for this background mountain, I'll create a new layer above layer 3, and it's going to automatically set it to a clipping mask because it's below layer 9. And I will grab the airbrush and go to soft brush. I'm going to sample this color here, this rock color that we've painted in, and I just want to softly paint in, very softly, just paint in some form onto this mountain. So we're just softly using the airbrush to almost carve out a certain shape, like the mountain kind of dips down right here. Again, just to further enhance the three-dimensionality of the mountain. And we don't need to go too much with it. I think that might be good enough there. And maybe we can do this in some other areas of the mountain too. So maybe right here, just where we see the mountain start to have the forms start to turn, right? So I think down here we could have a little bit of that shadow, and maybe in here as well. Just very lightly pressing on it. You could also turn down the opacity if you want. I'm keeping it at 100 because I don't have an issue with just lightly pressing, but if you feel more comfortable just turning down the opacity, feel free to do that. And if we feel like we want too much with it, we can do two things. So we could erase it. We can go to the erase tool and go to the airbrush, make sure it's set to soft brush, and we can erase some of it out. Or we could just paint over it with the snow, original snow blue color, but I'll just erase some of it out if I go a little overboard with it. So get some on the right side over here. And this, along with the lighting and those rocks that we've painted, should be all we need to really convey the form on this background mountain. And it is so far away that we're not going to notice it too much. We don't want it to be too noticeable, but we do want it to be there. I'll flip the canvas here to see how it's looking, and maybe erase some out right here. But I think that's all right for now. So I will now move on to the next mountain. So we'll go to layer 4. And I'm going to do something very similar with this mountain here. I will create a new layer above it, set it to clipping mask. I'll grab the round brush in the painting section, and I'm going to sample the base color that we've painted for this mountain, and I'm just going to make it slightly darker, maybe more saturated. And I'll start to paint in at the base, maybe a little lighter than that. This general value should be good. We'll just paint in at the base here. Again, these are going to be either rocks or trees. It doesn't matter too much. Maybe a mixture of both. And this base color that we painted earlier for the blue, will be the snow. So again, we're just kind of painting in like how we did before, these rocks or trees onto the snow, introducing a darker value and creating some form. So feel free to use the selection tool, get these nice clean edges, or just use the round brush. And once again, just be aware of the size variety with your shapes. Try to group them in a way to avoid having too much noise on the canvas. One of the nice things about this painting is we're mainly using cooler blue colors here, so it's monochromatic. And we don't need to worry too much about color harmony or color theory here. We're just kind of sticking to one color and just having a variety of values. And if you're new to painting, if you're a beginner to using colors and all of that, I really think that doing monochromatic paintings, or just even studies with monochromatic scenes, can be a really good way to deal with color but not have it be too overwhelming at first. We don't have to worry about making things too complicated. It's really just working with this blue color and just practicing with values, and oftentimes values are more important than colors when it comes to having a structured color palette. A lot of times if your values are good, then you'll find that working with colors is maybe a little bit easier. I also recommend practicing with value studies, so just doing a study of a scene but setting the photo to grayscale and painting the values that way, so you can kind of block out the noise of all the colors and just really just focus on the values. And I think that's a good way to build up value skills, and just knowing how to use values and group them and be comfortable with that. Maybe I'll do a video in the future on value studies. If that's something y'all would be interested in, just let me know. So still just building in this detail, these rocks and trees here, just keeping in mind the size variety with the shapes, and I think now I can get in some lighting, so I'll do the same thing as before. I'll make a new layer above this one, set it to clipping mask, and I'll just sample this light color that we've painted already, and I'm going to paint some of the right sides of this mountain here with that color. So it just picks up, the edge of the mountain is just picking up some of the sunlight, not too much. And I'll just add a few more smaller details here for these rocks on this mountain. And with this one looking good, I'll go on to layer 5, which is the next mountain here. Shouldn't need to do too much with this one. I think this one's mostly going to be covered in trees. I'll make it darker though. Now that I have these other mountains in here, I see that it needs to be darker. So we'll just move the brightness down a little bit, turn down the saturation slightly, and that should be good. So that's really all I need to do for layer 5. I'll now go to layer 6, which is this one here. And I am going to also make this one a little darker. So we'll turn this one down by about 2% to about 48. We'll turn the saturation down to about, say, 47. And I'll create a new layer above it, set it to clipping mask, and I'll do the same thing that we did for the other two mountains here, except kind of the opposite. So instead of painting in the rocks, I'm going to just sample the snow color here on the left side of the screen, and I'll just paint in the snow onto this darker color. And just want the top of this mountain to have the snow. And then it's going to start to break off and get thinner as we go down the mountain, and as there's more rocks and trees. Same as before, just using the round brush and the selection tool to do this. And I can erase into it as well to take some of that snow out if I feel like I did too much. Alright, I think that looks good enough to move on. So we will leave it at that. The next step, I'll go to layer 7, and I see that these could be slightly darker as well since we've changed all these mountains behind it, so we need to adjust the value. So I'll go up here to hue, saturation, and brightness sliders, turn down the brightness to about 49%, maybe 48%. And yeah, 48% should be good. So again, everything that's closer to us is going to be darker. So that's why I want to keep on, I want to have that transition from darkest shapes to slightly lighter, and then the very lightest shapes in the background here. And so on layer 7, I'm staying on this layer. I'm not creating a clipping mask. We're going to just stay on this layer and just start painting in with the round brush. And I want to get some tree shapes here, so I'm going to use the selection tool as well to get these evergreen triangular tree-like shapes. These triangular shapes here, paint these in. And now it's kind of a silhouette of maybe a forest, kind of a mountain forest or something like that. And now I will go to layer 8, which is this the darkest mountain and the closest ones up to us. I'm not sure why there was a layer 10 there. I'm just going to delete that, and I must have accidentally made a new layer on top of that at some point. So we'll go to layer 8, and I'm going to do something similar to what I just did with this one here with these tree shapes. I'm going to just select the round brush again and just paint in the indication of trees here. They don't all have to be triangles, but some of them can be, to show that there's a mixture of trees. So just painting in these edges here with the silhouette. Use the selection tool as well to get in some clean triangular edges. And I think these can be a little bigger than the trees behind it, since they are closer up, so we should probably make the tree shape slightly bigger. And so that way we have a scaling of depth. As we get further back, they get smaller. It's just going to make things feel more believable. And I'll do the same thing to the left side of the screen here. So on the same layer, just painting this in with a round brush and the selection tool, just getting these tree shapes in here. Alright, so now I'll go above this layer. So create a new layer, set it to clipping mask, and I'm going to make these selections in here of kind of these hill shapes where the trees aren't as dense and we're able to see some of the ground on this mountain. Just create some of these selections here. Again, just being aware of the size variety, getting some small shapes in there with a bigger shape, and get smaller as we go further back into the scene. And I'll do some on the left side here too. And I'm going to paint these in with a very neutral blue, and just paint this in. You can see it almost looks like a brown, like a warmer brown color, but it's really just a neutral blue. And it's so gray and neutral that it feels like it is a warmer color, which is an interesting thing about colors. I have these hill shapes in here. Maybe I can erase some of this out to have more of a darker bottom. So I will now create a new layer below that. So I'll go to layer 8 again, and I'll make a new layer. And this time I'm going to grab a airbrush, make sure it's on the soft brush, and I'll select the snow color up here for this mountain. We just need a lighter blue than what's already painted. And I'll just softly airbrush the top portions of this hill here, because we just want a subtle, soft atmosphere along the top. And right now I think it's a bit too heavy, so what I can do is turn down the opacity of this layer, and I'll turn it down to about 50%. So this is without it, and this is with it. And I think that with it, now we just get a subtle, slight gradient onto this shape, and I think that helps. And I can smudge some of it out just using an airbrush smudge tool here, and just smudging some of it up. And I'll do the same thing to the left side. Just softly paint this in with the airbrush, not pressing too hard. And then what I can do is sample this color down here and make it even darker. And then we can paint in along the very base, still using the airbrush, just a darker transition on the bottoms of this mountain. So now it really feels like we have this darker portion down here, and it starts to get lighter and lighter as we go back. And so if we take this layer off, you can see it feels flat, and now we have just a little more form in there. Maybe I'll get some more of this darkness in the middle portion here. And I can do this as well with the round brush. So I'll go to painting and then go to the round brush, and then maybe just draw in some shapes here to indicate some trees, just some detail. Not too much, but enough to just give the impression that there's some detail there. And I can do that on this side as well. And now it feels a little more layered. Alright, so the next thing that we can do now is get some atmosphere in between these mountains. So I will go above layer 3. Actually, I'll go above layer 11, so we're in front of everything on that mountain. Grab a soft airbrush here, and I'm going to sample the sky color up here, which is this light blue, and I'm going to just paint in very softly along the base of this mountain with this airbrush to create some atmosphere, maybe some fog down there. And what this will do is it's going to further separate these mountains out. So if we take that off, everything feels very close together. But when I start to add in this atmosphere, and maybe we can turn this one down a little bit, turn down the opacity to about maybe 60%, so it's not as strong. Maybe 58% is fine. And I'll do this for in front of all the layers. So I'll go in front of layer 4, so go in front of the clipping mask layers here, so in front of layer 14. Create a new one, so layer 18, and I'll just paint in some atmosphere down there, just at the very base. And you can see without it, we can barely even tell that there's two mountains right here. It kind of group together since the values are so close. But once I introduce this new layer with the atmosphere, now it really creates a nice silhouette along this mountain here. So I'll do that for the rest of these as well. I'll go above layer 5, do the same thing here. Again, just very softly. We don't want it to be too strong. And I'll go above layer 6 or layer 15 and paint this in here. And one more above layer 7, just to complete the fog. All right, so now we have some atmosphere in there. I want to do one more pass of that atmosphere, so I'll make a new layer above this layer 21 here. And I'm just going to create this horizontal line of atmosphere going across the screen, just to further push back everything back there and just make it feel a little bit more atmospheric and ambient. And if you do too much, you can again go to the erase tool, set it to airbrush, soft brush, and just erase some out if you need to. And this is without it, and this is with it. So maybe we'll turn down the opacity to about 70%. About 70% should be fine. And I think I'll turn down some of the opacity on some of this fog that we've gotten in previously. So just these layers that I went above the mountain, so layer 17 here, layer 18, I'll turn down these opacities just so it's less drastic. Because I did get in that horizontal strip of fog, and I feel like that influences a lot, or that really did a lot. So I'll just turn some of this down. And then I'll just leave this one here at 70%. This is that horizontal strip that we painted. So I think that's better. And I'll just adjust the value of this here. So layer 13, I'll just make this a little darker to about 49%, I think should be fine. And I'll do that as well for layer 5, just darken it a little bit more. And layer 15, I'll do that as well, just darken this by about 1%. All right, so now is the time to really just clean up any shapes and add in any final details that you want to add in, because after that, we're going to get in the reflection, which is going to mirror everything. So we don't want the reflection to look different than how the land does above it. So make any final details and adjustments. That's what I'll be doing. I'll speed up the video here and get back for the next step, which is going to be the reflections. One thing to keep in mind when painting details as well is, for example, on this mountain, we want there to be a nice balance between the areas of rest and the areas of noise. So we don't want to have too much detail because that's going to overwhelm the eye. And for example, if there's too many rocks compared to the snow. So we want to have a nice balance of snow, which would be the areas of rest, and these detailed rocks, which would be the areas of noise or detail. So that's just something to keep in mind when building up these details. It's good not to zoom in too much, because I find that once I start to zoom in, I start to lose sight of how everything looks together. So if we keep things kind of zoomed out, we're able to get a bigger picture of how everything's looking. All right, so I've added some more detail here. I've cleaned up some of these shapes. For example, I've added some lighting on this part of the mountain here, just on this edge right here. I've added some more details along this background mountain, cleaned up some of the lighting, and now we're almost ready to get into the reflections. There's just a couple more things that we can do. Layer 7 here, I'll move this one above layer 21, just so it's a little darker and it's above some of that fog, and I'll make it slightly darker. Just turn down the brightness by about 1% there, just to have it closer up to the viewer and to have more space behind it. And then what I want to do is go down to layer 3, and I'll just increase the saturation of this whole layer here to about 55%, I think should be good, to get more color into the scene. And I'll also do that for layer 4 right here, just increase some of the saturation just to get more blue into the snow. And maybe I'll do it as well for layer 15 here. Just do about 55% should be good enough. Maybe for layer 5 as well. Just really, I'm just adding more color into the scene. Again, like I said earlier, a lot of things we kind of have to just see how they develop, and we can always make adjustments. Once we start adding more colors and more values, we'll start to see how things look together, and definitely just want to add some more color here. So we'll do that for a few of these layers. And this is one of those things you might not need to if your colors are, how you want them already. And I'll do that for the sky layer too. I feel like it feels a little bland. Add some more color into the sky. Maybe we'll go to about 60% here. Yeah, that should be good. And go to the airbrush, make sure we're on the sky layer, and I'll just hit the bottom of the sky with just a slight white color just to kind of complete that gradient a little more. Now that we have the mountains in, we want that gradient to be just about there. All right, so now we're ready to get in some reflections. So what we'll do here is I'll go up to layer 2, which is the water layer, and then I'll go to the wrench icon at the top left, tap on copy canvas and paste. And now we've just pasted the canvas onto a new layer. So here it says inserted image above layer 2. We can tap on that layer, set it to clipping mask, and now it will only show up within this rectangle on layer 2. So now that we have the copy canvas layer on a clipping mask on layer 2, we can go up to the move tool here, tap on flip vertical, and now everything that we've painted previously is now showing up as a reflection on this water. So we want to drag this down until it mirrors what we have. The orange lines show that it's centered on the canvas, so we want it to be centered, so make sure that it's snapped to the orange lines. And if you don't see those, you can turn on the snapping tool down here, and these are my settings for the snapping tool. It basically just makes the image snap into place. So just make it lined up to those orange lines, and that means that it's centered. And then we can tap on distort, and I'm just gonna distort it up and down, just kind of squashing it a little bit here. And once we have this mirrored how we like it, we can tap on the move tool again to complete the adjustments, and now we can add some details to this water. So the first thing I'll do is lower the opacity of this layer to about 90%, just so it's not a perfect mirror. It looks a little bit more like water here. And the next thing I can do is go on layer 2, and I'll just sample this darker color here, and I'll make sure I'm on a soft brush. I'm just gonna paint some of this bottom down here. Maybe we can go even darker just to get, and it may not be very noticeable, but it is a subtle darkness, kind of like a vignette on the bottom. And we can go even darker, just make the corners a little bit darker here. So what I can do now is make sure that we're on the reflection layer, and I'll go to motion blur, and I'll just drag it down to about 10%. So I'm dragging downwards on the canvas. So that will indicate the direction of the motion blur. And again, just to about 10% there. So now the water feels like it's not completely clear. It has a little bit of a blur to it. All right, so you may notice that there's this strip of blue right here, and I don't really want that to be there. So I'm just gonna select the smudge tool, and just smudge that out. Again, we're on the reflection layer, so I'm just smudging some of that reflection down a little bit here, just to get rid of that. Now that looks about good. I'll make a new layer above the mirror layer, and I'll set it to clipping mask. And I'm going to use the selection tool here and set it to rectangle. And I'm going to make these selections here, just one selection, and kind of where we were just messing with that reflection. And I'm going to sample a color from the sky and just softly paint this in with a round brush. And I'll do this again a few times, and I will make sure that the lines are thinner, closer towards the horizon. And I'll just do a few of those, and maybe I can just have it feel more natural. So just paint in. It doesn't have to be a complete rectangle. We can just get in these shapes right there. We can erase into them as well. Kind of maybe like a wave, just some movement on this water. Just erase into that a little bit here. So it kind of feels like some waves, or like I said, there's some movement on the water here. And we can do another one here. This time I'll just use the freehand tool and just make a selection and paint it in again, just lightly pressing. If I was to press hard, it would become opaque, and I don't want that. So I'll just lightly press to where we can still kind of see through, still see some of that reflection, but just to get a little bit of that movement on the water. And I'll do that as well along this land right here, just along the shoreline of the land. And maybe on the other side as well. And one thing I'll do after this is optional, but I'll create a new layer above everything, and I'll just make some bird selections in here. Maybe I think right here could be a good spot. And I know I didn't get it on the reflection, so it's an easy fix. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. So I'll just paint these birds in here using a white color so they have nice contrast. And then what I can do is duplicate this layer, bring it above the reflection layer, tap on the move tool, tap on flip vertical, and then we can just bring these down. And if you have snapping enabled, like I mentioned earlier, you will see these three blue lines, and you can make sure that they're lined up and just kind of fit it to where they need to be. You can turn down the opacity to about 90%, and you can go up to adjustments, use the motion blur, and do it to about 10%, which is the same as the reflection layer. So if there's anything else you need to add into the scene, say you want maybe some more birds up in the sky, you can always just do that and not have to worry about having to redo the reflection. All right, so with that, I think everything looks pretty good. I may go in and change up some details and just refine a few things. But for the most part, for this tutorial, I think this does a pretty good job. So I hope this tutorial helped. Thanks for watching, and stay creative.